You went quiet, and you cannot tell if it saved your life or ended it. The weight of other people stopped landing, and you call it healing. Jung calls it a season, a silence that settles over the soul like that frozen field past your window. And no one survives this winter. The empath who walks in does not walk back out, and something is already drowning under the quiet. What dies here kept you alive once, and its time has come. Walk down into the cold, and you will see what is ending, and it will not be your gift for feeling. You will feel the people who leaned on you sense the floor go quiet and reach to pull you back. You will follow what the winter is really doing, the slow pulling back of the force that made you flood every field down to where it means to go. This season takes the self you were proudest of, the poorest self that believed love was earned by carrying everyone. The death you feel is your warmth being drawn back to its source, and almost no one knows that while standing in the cold. You might know the small version before the large one, the message you read and leave unanswered, the call you let ring out, and the double feeling that follows, relief and guilt in the same breath, so tangled you cannot tell which one is true. There is a woman, 53 years old, who has spent most of her life as the low place everything drained toward. When her mother first got sick, she became the one the whole family called, and she stayed that for 30 years. A heavy coat hung on a hook by her front door the entire time, and she kept it there on purpose, ready, because she was the one who came when called. The sister in the middle of a divorce called her first. The brother who only surfaced when something had broken called her first. She was the one handed the crying child, the one seated beside the relative the rest of them could not bear, and her quiet work at every gathering was to keep the air breathable for everyone except herself. What the family called her generous heart was the simple fact that she had no edges to stop the water. A river with no banks floods every field it passes, and she flooded all of them, soaking up her mother's dread and her sister's grief and a stranger's worst afternoon until she could no longer tell which of the water was hers. Therefore, the quiet, when it came, felt like something going wrong. The calls still reach her. The heavy moods still cross the room toward her. But they stop a few feet short now, and they stand there, and they do not enter. She has started to read this as healing, and Jung would tell her she is half right and far too early. He describes the soul as a thing with seasons, and a season is not chosen and cannot be hurried. It arrives when the inner time is ripe, the way winter arrives over a field whether or not the field agreed to it. A change of season is no improvement. It is a death and a birth happening in the same ground, and the death always comes first. So the stillness she is reading as progress is the front edge of an ending, and the first thing an ending does is feel like loss. This is where so many turn back. They feel the old, automatic caring go quiet, and they panic, certain the kindest part of them is dying, that they are going cold, that the one good thing they ever were is leaving them. They reach for the coat on the hook to prove they are still who they were. What is going quiet in her was vigilance more than kindness, the watchfulness wearing kindness as a uniform, the part of her that learned early that she was easiest to love when she was useful, safest when she was needed, and that a person with no needs of her own gives others no reason to leave. That arrangement kept her alive in rooms that had no other room for her, and it turned her into a field with no fences and a river with no banks, and a season has finally arrived to take it. But the season does not announce what it has come for. It feels from the inside like the loss of the only self she ever liked. And to understand why losing it grieves like a death instead of freeing her like a release, you have to look closely at the one thing the winter has actually come to kill. So look at what is going into the cold, because it will not be her sensitivity. Her sensitivity will walk out the far side of this winter intact, perhaps sharper than it went in. What is dying is the compulsion that grew up around it, the reflex that turned every feeling she picked up into a task she was responsible for carrying. Jung has a clinical way of describing this. Libido, the psyche's available energy, withdrawing from a complex that has run the show too long. Her overcharged complex is the rescuer, built long ago to read the weather of other people and rearrange herself around it so no storm ever landed on her directly. That part is being starved of its fuel. As it starves, it panics. This is the cruelty hidden inside the relief. The self that is dying was no villain. It worked. It earned her a seat at every table, a role in every crisis, and the closest thing to love she had ever been offered, which was being needed. To grieve it is not weakness. You are burying the only version of yourself the world ever reliably wanted, and a burial is supposed to hurt. There was one ordinary proof of that self, repeated for years. A phone would ring after midnight, the sister in the middle of her divorce or the brother who only surfaced when something had broken, and before the second ring, she was already awake and reaching for the coat on the hook. She drove across a sleeping city more times than she could count, sat on the cold edge of someone's bathtub while they cried themselves empty, said the steadying thing, then drove home in the gray light and went to work as if the night had not happened. The family never thanked that part of her, because to them it was simply what she was for. That is the self the winter has come to bury, and a person does not lower 30 years of being the one who came into the ground without feeling it open underneath them. Here the path bends in a way that catches almost everyone off guard, because the energy bound up in that dying self stays in her, pulled loose from its old job and sent somewhere new. And what it does with the long dark of the winter is the whole question. She is nowhere near the answer yet. For now there is only the strange, low grief of a woman who reaches for her coat out of 30 years of habit and finds, for the first time, that her hand stops halfway to the hook. The phone had lit up. The old machinery had fired. The familiar surge of, "I have to go, I am needed," the surest proof she had ever had that she existed. But the surge crested and found nothing underneath it, no compulsion left to obey, and her hand came back down empty. She stood in her own hallway not knowing whether she had just grown up or just gone dead. That confusion is the honest condition of this stage, and a person standing inside it is not breaking, whatever it feels like. Jung would not rush her past it. He warns against forcing the psyche, against dragging it toward a resolution it has not earned. The withdrawal of energy from an old role feels, while it happens, exactly like depression, a graying of everything that used to move you. The difference between that graying and a true deadening cannot be seen from inside it. It is revealed later by what grows back. What the winter is taking from her is the belief that love is a debt, paid in the coin of self-erasure. The love itself stays. But while she stands in the hallway with her hand empty, the floor of her ordinary life is dropping away beneath her, and the next thing the season asks is that she go down into the dark it opens. Therefore the descent begins, and from the outside it looks like a woman quietly coming apart. The descent has a shape the old alchemists drew over and over, and Jung spends years of his own life inside it. After he breaks with Freud and loses the map his whole career was built on, he goes down into his own depths for a long stretch of darkness, and across the years that follow, he goes to the edge of a lake and builds a tower of stone with his own hands. He is choosing that silence on purpose, building a vessel around his own depth so it can hold him instead of drowning him, and he comes back from it. That is the part to keep. The descent he models is voluntary and temporary. He goes in like a man going down a well, not like a man moving into a grave. Her descent is less deliberate. The floor simply gave way. The ambition that used to organize her days has thinned to almost nothing. Her tolerance for performing a warmth she does not feel has dropped to zero. The water that used to pour out of her toward every field has gone still, and then the surface of it begins to freeze. This is the most fragile stretch of the whole season, because everything that matters has gone underground and the surface has nothing to show for it. The ice on top looks like an ending. Underneath it, in the dark she cannot see into, the water that used to flood is feeling for somewhere to go, some channel of its own it has never had. The cold has stopped the flooding, which is a mercy. What she cannot yet tell is whether the water beneath the ice is still searching for that channel, or whether it has begun to still itself for good, while she stands on the surface and starts to believe the stillness is where the season was taking her all along. The thing that always threatened her was dissolution, the way she would lose the edges of herself inside another person's mood until she was only weather passing through them, and the danger was never anyone's cruelty. So when the noise stops reaching her, part of her is genuinely safe for the first time in her life. But safety and numbness wear the same gray down here. Her nervous system, which ran on alarm for 50 years, has finally powered down, and a body coming off that much vigilance feels less like peace than the floor of a deep, quiet exhaustion. Jung points to a discipline for exactly this stretch, a deliberate non-doing, a way of getting out of the psyche's way so it can do the slow work the conscious mind cannot force. For a woman whose whole identity was built on doing, on going, on taking the coat off the hook, that is the hardest instruction imaginable. To sit in the cold and do nothing while something invisible reassembles her, and to trust a process she cannot see and did not design. The coat stays on the hook now for days at a stretch. The phone lights and goes dark and lights again, and she watches it the way you watch weather through glass. The watchfulness that ran her whole life is still here, only now it watches her instead of the room. But a river does not freeze in private. While she is down in the cold, learning to bear her own weight, the people downstream are standing in fields that have always been wet, looking at cracked dry ground, and beginning to feel the change as something that has been done to them. A self that stops performing its role is felt instantly by everyone who relied on that role. The fields downstream know nothing about her winter. They only know the water stopped. First comes the soft version, the warmth that cools a degree, the careful question about whether everything is all right, the test to see if the old supply can be coaxed back. Therefore, she feels the pull before she hears a single hard word, a gravity trying to draw her back into the current. Then, when the water does not come back, the soft version curdles and the labels arrive. She has gone cold. She has changed, gotten selfish or arrogant or strange, and each word is a hook thrown into the current to catch the old supply and drag it back. Jung describes a mechanism underneath this that is worth understanding, because it explains the venom. For years she was a mirror. People handed her their disowned feelings, their unbearable moods, their worst afternoons, and she absorbed them and reflected back something softer. When she stops absorbing, the projection has nowhere to go but back onto the person who threw it. They are suddenly face to face with their own unmetabolized weather, and they experience that homecoming as her cruelty. If you have lived this, put it into words below. Write this in the comments, I went quiet, and they called it cruelty. The thing you could never quite say to the people who needed you, you can at least say here, and the next person scrolling through their own winter will know they are not the only one in it. There is something specific happening when an old friend tells you that you have abandoned them. Some of them are grieving you, and some of them are only grieving the loss of a service. They do not miss her presence so much as their access to her. The place they used to pour the overflow, and the dry season feels like a betrayal, because not one of them ever thought of the river as a thing with a life of its own. Her sister said it most plainly. She left a message saying the family had talked and decided the woman they used to know would never have left them to struggle alone like this. She listened to it twice. The old machinery strained to fire, the apology already assembling itself, the urge to call back and disprove the message by doing whatever was being asked. She set the phone down instead and let the words stand, and the guilt that rose in her was so physical it arrived like an accusation with a body, pressing on her chest, insisting she had done something monstrous by doing nothing at all. But this is the exact place the season can be misread, so sit with the difficulty of it. Some of that pushback is pure information. the closing of a door that was only ever a door for them to walk through in one direction. And some of it is a cage, the people who genuinely love her reaching for the only language they have to say they are frightened of losing her. At this stage, she cannot reliably tell the two apart, and neither can you, and rushing to decide is its own kind of mistake. The sign worth watching for is quiet and easy to miss. It is whether the force pulled out of all those rescues begins, even faintly, to turn back toward her own life. That return is the whole point of the season, and it does not show until the very bottom of the winter. A boundary that needs the other person to be a monster is only a grudge wearing better clothes. Therefore, the real turning was never going to happen out there in the dry fields and the unanswered calls. It happens far below them, at the lowest, coldest point of the season, in the one place she has been most afraid to look. At the bottom of the winter, the cold stops being a relief and becomes a danger, and it is a quiet one. This is the stretch the whole season is named for, the part where no one survives, and it earns that line in a way the title only hints at. Because the water under the ice can lose its nerve. After a lifetime of flooding, the idea of ever moving again can feel like the only thing left to fear, and so the water reaches for the one thing that feels like safety, which is not moving at all. It can freeze in place, all the way down to the stones, and call that stillness the end of the road. Jung is precise about this failure, the quietest danger on the whole path. He describes the descent as a crossing a person has to come back up from, a night passage rather than a place to live, and warns that the energy which has gone down can simply stay down, leaving someone becalmed in the depths and certain they have arrived. The empath who has gone quiet is in particular danger here, because the absence of the old flooding feels so much like peace. After decades of being pulled in every direction, not being pulled at all can seem like the destination the season was promising, when it is only the halfway dark. The line the season keeps whispering is that pain cannot reach you here. It is true, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. After a lifetime inside other people's storms, a place where nothing lands on you at all can feel like the home you were never given. But that quiet is only the still point in the middle of a crossing. A person who builds a life there, deciding the goal was always to stop feeling the flood, freezes the very thing that was trying to carry her the rest of the way. The warmth and the joy and the love were riding the same current as the pain, and a freeze deep enough to stop the one stops all of them. She felt the pull of it at a family gathering, the first one since the water stopped. The old role reached for her and she stood outside it, untouched, and instead of the old exhaustion, there was only a vast, smooth quiet. Their moods did not move her, nothing landed, and a thought arrived, soft and reasonable, that she could live here in this exact stillness and never be flooded again. That was the most dangerous moment of her whole season, because if she had said yes to it, if she had made that stillness her address, she would have done what a river does when it stops believing it can move at all. She would have frozen where she stood and named the deadness peace, and spent the rest of her life certain the ice was solid ground. She caught it. Something in her refused the soft invitation to stop. She felt, underneath the calm, that this stillness was the old disappearing act in its final form, the same self-erasure that had run her whole life, this time aimed at her own existence instead of arranged around everyone else's. To freeze for good would have been the last and largest way of not being here. That refusal is the hinge of the whole winter. A peace you can only keep by never moving again is just the flood holding its breath. So the season comes down to one last unknown, and it cannot be answered from inside the cold. When the thaw finally comes, and it does come, she will learn whether the water beneath the ice spent the winter cutting itself a channel, or whether it stopped at the still point and stayed. The thaw does not arrive as a decision. It arrives the way every season arrives, on its own schedule, when the inner time is ripe. One ordinary morning the cold has loosened, and the woman who went down into the winter is not the woman standing in the light. The flooding is gone, genuinely gone, and she does not mourn it. What moves again in spring is the same water that always moved in her, except the long dark under the ice was never empty. All that time, out of sight, it was doing the one thing it had never been allowed to do. It was cutting itself a bed. It is a river with banks. The water is every bit as deep, but it no longer pours into every dry field it passes. It has edges now, ground that holds it to its own course, and it can run right beside a parched field without emptying into the dirt. It can be deep without being everywhere. People can still come to the water. They kneel at the bank and drink, and the river gives freely, but from its overflow instead of its life. And when they go, it is still there, still moving, still itself. This is what survives the silent season. Her sensitivity came back sharper because it is no longer drowning in everyone at once. She can sit in a room full of other people's weather and feel all of it and stay a separate person while she feels it. She still loves. She simply stopped being responsible for how everyone around her feels. The difference shows in small things. A boundary she holds now needs no villain to justify it, because she is no longer borrowing her strength from her anger. She can say no to someone she loves and let them be disappointed, and not bleed about it for a week. The coat still hangs on the hook by her door, but it has become a coat again, an ordinary thing she puts on when she chooses to go to someone who truly needs her, and takes off when she comes home. For 30 years it hung there like a uniform she was never off duty from. Now it is only a coat. Not long after the thaw, the brother called again, and this time it was real, a wreck of a night that truly needed someone. She felt the old pull arrive, and under it the new, quiet question of whether this was hers to carry. It was, and she went. This time she went the way a person walks down to the bank to sit beside someone in the dark, staying a separate self the whole way through. And when the night was over, she came home still herself, the water in her still moving. A week later came the familiar tug of a crisis that was not a crisis, a storm someone wanted her to stand in so they would not have to feel the rain, and she let the phone ring out. Both choices cost her almost nothing, because she was no longer paying for them with her life. The phone rings, and sometimes she goes, and sometimes she stays. And the choosing is the whole distance between the woman who walked into the winter and the one who walked out. So the warning in the title was true the entire time, and it was never a threat. No one survives the silent season. The empath who walks into the cold does not walk back out, because the porous, overgiving, everyone else first self is exactly what the winter came to bury. That self had to die so the woman underneath it could finally feel the whole world without disappearing into it. The death was the point. The wound was supposed to die so the depth could live. What the winter took from you was the sentence that said everyone's feelings were your job. What it gave back was the feeling itself, finally your own. The one who walks out of the winter is warmer than the one who walked in. Finally held by banks, she grew herself, standing in the first warm morning on the far side of a death that handed her back her own life. And if you are somewhere out on this path, leave the other half of the story below. Write this in the comments: I am building the banks I never had. The empath who walked into the cold does not walk back out, but the one who walks out of the thaw is the one worth becoming, and your line might be the first warm light for whoever reads it after you.
Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.